3 that costs okay, that costs about 170 million. Um, and layer facilities were the most difficult to eradicate and to clean and disinfect. And more recently, we had the avian influenza outbreak of 2015 in the Midwest that where we lost, I think it was about 10% of our national layer flock, 7.5% of our turkey flock, uh, lost a total of about 48 million birds, and they estimate the total economic cost being about $3.5 billion. So pretty difficult situation. And of course, let's not forget about the pandemic flu outbreak of 1918. And this is one of the big reasons why we're interested in high path AI, because of its potential to mutate into something that could be zoonotic and affect humans. So, what is biosecurity? Of course, bio means life, whereas security means protection. So basically, when you practice biosecurity, you're protecting life. So you try to protect organisms from diseases, whether it be plant or animal, and a large part of that program will be good disinfection practices. So they say never take a microbiology class that it'll ruin your life, right? And the reason why people might say that is because it'll make you aware of how many different kinds and types and number of microbes that we're exposed to are around us in our natural world. I think just the microbes in our gut outnumber us by a couple of orders of magnitude. There are microbes on your skin, on your computer keypad. Hello, and so they're everywhere. So um, I employed the help of Spider-Man and General Grievous to do a quick little experiment to look at some of these microbes in our environments. And basically, we just took a cotton swab, soaked in buffered Peptone water, and we swabbed some things around the house. We swabbed the bottom of my work boot, the inside of our garbage can, just the dirt in the backyard, our dog bowl, and the kitchen sink. And we kind of suspected the dog bowl would be the dirtiest because Max the Wonder Dog's done some pretty unspeakable things in his life. So we just knew that would be awful. Whereas we thought the kitchen sink would be clean, the shoe and the dirt. We didn't expect too much because it was summertime in Mississippi. Of course, the garbage can we thought would be pretty awful as well. Surprisingly, we found the highest numbers of bacteria in our kitchen sink drain and on the ground outside, and a little bit less bacteria on the trash can and on the bottom of my shoe. Saw a little bit more fungi in this sample, and Max, the Wonder Dog's food bowl was the cleanest of our 5 samples, which was surprising. So the moral of this story is things that you think are clean may not be clean, and things that you think are dirty and have a lot of microorganisms on them may not be. So just because you visually see something or don't see something doesn't mean that is or isn't there. So be cognizant of that. So a few things you can do to improve biosecurity include keeping log books so you have a record of who all comes and goes to your complex. Signage to prevent people from just showing up unexpectedly on your farm and potentially spreading contagion. Of course, traffic control. Things like fences and gates are very useful, and your own traffic patterns are important. If you're going to visit a sick flock, that's going to be the last one that you should see. And you typically you visit young to old flocks because the younger birds are going to be less. They're going to be more immunocompromised than let's say an older bird that has a chance to develop a good immune system. Of course, we want to isolate our birds from diseases, and this includes fencing. And you should consider anything outside your rearing operation as a vector or fomite which can transmit disease to your operation, whether it's your next door neighbor, a barred shovel, or what have you. Pest control is very important when it comes to biosecurity, as mice, rats, birds, and insects have been shown to carry a number of different diseases. Ideally, you want to have about a 2 to 3 foot layer of gravel, or maybe just bare dirt, so that because these rodents don't typically like to cross that because of the color contrast. They suspect that it makes them more susceptible to predation. These are some examples of some homemade bait stations. We place them every 20 foot around our building to prevent to reduce our rodent population. Of course, this one over here on the left isn't very effective, so as it's covered with fire ant mounds. So we want to keep an eye on that. You notice here in this slide that there's an awful lot of fecal matter for flies, which is attractant for flies. There's also an awful lot of feed on spilled feed on the ground and on top of this manure pile. So that's attraction for wild birds, insects, and rodents, which you don't want. So you want to try to limit that as much as possible. This is a rain gutter on one of our buildings, and whenever we would have dew, morning dew, this pole would always be full of water, so it's a good place for animals to come and get a drink right next to our broiler house, which is not a good thing. There's a lot of grass and harborage here. You see these, discarded wooden pallets. Ideally, you want everything to be mowed and trimmed so that you do reduce, harborage for rodents and insects. And of course, it's hard to do in the springtime, but we have to do it to reduce the threat of disease. If you are disposing of dead birds, that should be one of the last things that you do during your day, so that you don't potentially spread diseases to your healthy birds. And obviously, you should wash your hands afterwards so you don't transmit shared diseases. So look at this broiler house. This one looks really good. You can tell the grower really pays a lot of attention to detail. All the light bulbs are burning. Everything looks clean, and it's ready for baby chicks. All he needs to do is put out some starter feed in the trays and warm the facility for the baby chicks, and it's ready to go. Nice, clean wood shavings. Everything's wonderful. Well, then I start looking at something, and I see these little track marks in the house. I'm like, what is that? And I kind of followed it throughout the house. There are quite a few of them, and I find this at the end of my trail. So this grower went to these great efforts to keep their house ready and prepare it for baby chicks, um, and yet he allows his dog to come in and leave a present, which is obviously a huge breach in biosecurity. Personal protective equipment is useful in isolating individuals from various pathogens, as well as isolating the birds from any pathogens that might be on their clothes. But realize there are some limitations. This is a booty that I had on, and I think I walked about 10 foot from my truck to the medicator room, and you see all the holes that were in that booty. So they help, but there are limitations. So it's good to realize that and to account for that. Foot baths are a good tool for disinfecting shoes before you enter a poultry barn. I like liquid foot baths, but the problem is they become so full of organic matter that they're probably not going to work very well. So you see a lot of these dry bleaches here, and I think they do a fair good job. After the avian influenza break in the Midwest, I see a lot more car washes installed at some of these integrators. complex, mainly with the layer facilities, and I think these are useful. Um, but the reality is, a lot of these truck washes are pretty anemic, and you might get a flow rate of something like this at the facility. And reality is, you want something like this. I know that might not be practical, but you got to get those surfaces clean before you disinfect them. So just lightly spritzing the vehicle with disinfectant isn't doing anybody any good. And of course, this would even be better, right? Um, I see from time to time some of these pits where the vehicle can drive through. I really don't like these because they're usually full of mud and organic matter. I don't really think we're accomplishing a whole lot with these drive-through pits of disinfectant. I would suggest that every farm have some kind of a hard surface at their gate, because what happens is if you do have to clean and disinfect a vehicle, you're going to have a mud hole like this that generates over time. So it'd be nice to have a good concrete pad so that you can wash vehicles that are coming and going from your farm. Um, and reiterate, the earlier point, you want your tires to be clean before you disinfect them, because spraying disinfectant on a muddy tire is not going to do any good. The other thing I should mention is time's important for these disinfectants to work. They need at least a 10-minute contact time typically. And if you spray the tires with disinfectant and then you just drive off onto a gravel road or pull forward um, and take off, that disinfectant hasn't had the time that it needs to do a very good job. So don't forget about contact time. It's important. So there are 5 major steps to cleaning and disinfection. The first one's removing the organic matter. So this is kind of a dry cleaning. So it'd be a leaf blower, broom, shovel, scrapers. You're trying to get all the three-dimensional uh, crud out of the facility before you clean it. Next, you're going to do the washing step, and this is where you use soap to help reduce the surface tension of the water and break up the organic matter. Okay. And this is where a lot of your effort needs to come into. You probably want to get in there with brooms, power washers, and really scrub to get them physically clean. Then you want to rinse away the soap and the organic matter, and you want to dry that surface. A lot of people forget about the drying step, but it's very important, because if the surface is still wet and you apply diluted disinfectant, you've just diluted that disinfectant even more, and now maybe it's not able to do the job that it needs to do. So drying's very important. And of course, the very last step is disinfection. So reality is, 99.99% of the work um, has to go into getting that surface physically clean before you disinfect. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels. You should also consider what kind of surface am I treating. Some of the disinfectants aren't compatible with certain metals or wood. I know peracetic acid is not a good disinfectant to apply for wood because it'll break down the lignin in the wood. You need to read the label so you do know what pathogens that disinfectant is good for. You need to know, the dilutions, the methods of application, and you also need to consider your personal safety. Some of these disinfectants, the ones that work very well, are are kind of have some drawbacks as far as safety is concerned. So you need to wear the appropriate personal protective equipment to protect yourself. So next, let's talk about a disinfection trial that we did using firefighting foam. There's been some literature by the folks in Georgia that have looked at cleaning and disinfecting broiler transportation coops, and they found that using things like chlorinated water, hot air, and that type of thing are good for reducing bacteria on broiler transportation coops. They've done some really good work there. However, not very much has been done on the layer side of the industry. We were interested in using foam because we already have a foam trailer that was purchased for another euthanasia project that we talked about. Actually, a webinar here, I guess, a month or two ago. Foam's wonderful because it increases your surface contact time. It helps to clean hard to reach areas. You're able to actually see where you applied the product, whereas if you just spray applied something, it might be difficult to tell, what surfaces that you had hit or not. And this is actually a picture of me with our personal protective equipment, PAPR, and our compressed air foam system that we'll talk about shortly. As far as poultry euthanasia goes, there are three main types. Well, two main types that you may have heard about. One is the aspirated system, or some people call the North Carolina style foam for euthanasia of birds reared in floor pens. Then we have the high expansion foam, which is a water powered fan foam that you'd see on a KIPCO unit. And both of these methods work well for broiler euthanasia. But the other method is using the energy from an air compressor to make foam, and this is called a compressed air foam system. And it comes out with quite a bit of velocity, as you see here in this picture. And the advantage of a compressed air foam system is that you can make the foam wetter or drier according to your needs. And it does a really good job of coating the surface pretty quickly with foam. So our system has a 40 horsepower gas engine that powers a 150 gallon per minute Hell water pump, a 70 CFM rotary screw air compressor, a Van air compressor. We have a foam pro proportioner to inject the foam concentrate, our 8-gallon foam cell, and a 300-gallon water tank. And you can see how easy it is to cover a surface with the calf system. And we thought that it'd be great to use as a carrier for disinfectants. And we did a trial looking at broiler transportation coops, and we could get anywhere from 100 to a 10,000 fold reduction in bacteria when we applied disinfectants with this system. And of course, we thought we came up with a great idea, and we thought that was kind of novel for our purposes. But as luck would have it, another gentleman, Mr. Bruce Spielholtz, actually has the patent for this process in 1988. But we didn't see any peer-reviewed publication to indicate whether it worked or not. So we still had still proud to do the work. So we hypothesized a compressed air foam system could be used for disinfection of layer cages. And we wanted to look at using cast for cleaning and disinfection and to evaluate some standard operating procedures used by the poultry industry. So the funding that we received wanted to concentrate on avian influenza response, but obviously it'd be difficult to seed a poultry integrator with avian influenza, so probably a bad idea. So what we thought we would do is look at indicator organisms such as aerobic bacteria, because we know that avian influenza virus is fairly delicate and responds is pretty sensitive to most disinfectants. So we used aerobic bacteria as an indicator organism for cleaning of that surface. So basically, we had 4 rows of cages within this pullet or layer house. One half of the building we applied our foam product, and the other half the industry applied their product. And this is what it kind of looks like. We use cattle ear tags to mark all of our cages, and we collected 16 samples from the cup drinkers and 16 from the cage floor for each treatment. And we did pre and post sampling to look at log reductions. Basically, we used the outline of the cage floor to get the same surface area collected each time, and we collected the entire inside of a cup drinker to keep things consistent. And it was a pretty simple process. We used a 2x2 gauze pad that was soaked in buffer Peptone water and a clean gloved hand to collect each new sample. We serially diluted the sample and enumerated the bacteria using tryptic soy auger plates. And this is just how we would set up the trailer and run the hose through the fan so we could begin the process. So for the first 2 trials, we looked at using peracetic acid, which is basically hydrogen peroxide and vinegar mixture, and we needed a foaming agent, so we used Phos-Chek firefighting foam as a carrier. The industry wanted us to evaluate their product, so they used a 7% glutaraldehyde, 26% quat blend. And what we found was about a 2 log reduction or a 100-fold reduction in aerobic bacteria when we used the peracetic acid. However, the quat glute blend wasn't as successful. We did see a reduction on the floor, but not a statistically significant reduction on the drinker side. Then we came back a second time, and again we saw about a 2 log reduction with the peracetic acid, and the glute quaternary product worked much better the second time, and we believe that might be because the people at the at the integrator were realized that they were being watched a little more closely, and we think this might be an indication of their increased efforts to clean the cages beforehand. Then we looked at using a chlorinated cleaner. Um, I think there's several companies that sell it. Chlorofoam, Alpha Foam. They're all pretty similar mixtures, but basically have potassium hydroxide, bleach, and a surfactant. So cleaner by definition may not kill bacteria, but maybe it can help to remove the bacteria from that surface. And then the other half of the house, we just do a power wash. So the cleaner really didn't help us any as far as reducing our bacteria, and neither did the power wash. We actually saw a statistical increase and in the amount of bacteria after we did these things, and we're kind of scratching our head on this, but we think it may be because we're actually loosening up some of the organic matter on the cages, and maybe that's why we're seeing an increase in bacteria. Also, there's a manure board underneath the cages that was not clean, and it's possible that there's some splashback from that manure board onto our cages, causing these increases. But uh, it is, I guess it is what it is. We did see a reduction with the cleaner with the drinkers with the second rep, but again, we see these increases in bacteria with both treatments. Then for the last two trials, we looked at our 14% glutaraldehyde quaternary ammonia blend as compared to the industry 7% glutaraldehyde high quat blend. And this was, the greatest reduction that we observed through these trials, with up to a 3 log reduction in aerobic bacteria with the high glutaraldehyde product. Whereas we only saw a reduction on the floors with the low or lower glutaraldehyde product. And then we repeated this and saw a similar phenomenon with 3 log reduction, actually almost a 3.5 log reduction on the drinkers, whereas there are no significant reductions with the low glutaraldehyde product. Now, I should say that we didn't compare these two products directly for a couple reasons. One, and it's not fair to compare them directly because one, we applied the 14% glutaraldehyde with foam, whereas this was applied with a spray system. We applied about 900 gallons of diluted product, whereas the company applied about, I think it was like 60 gallons or so. So, different application methods, different concentrations of products, different amounts. So don't, kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about this. So in summary, the high pressure water rinse nor the cleaner really consistently reduced bacteria. The 7% glutaraldehyde blend product did work on occasion, but it wasn't as consistent. And this is probably due to the amount of organic matter that was still in the cages when this was applied. Peracetic acid worked very well with about 2 log reduction in bacteria, but it, the problem is the grower wasn't too happy because they thought we rusted their cages out a little bit since we used an acid, which we probably won't use that product in the future on metal surfaces. Um, the 14% glutaraldehyde was the most interesting reductions, with up to almost a 4 log reduction in bacteria on the drinkers and the floors. So again, we use about 900 gallons of product applied by foam, whereas the industry only applied, actually this is a typo, they applied about 60 gallons of their product. We took about twice as long applying the foam to half the house, whereas they took about an hour to apply their product. So in conclusion, we believe that CAFS is a good method to clean and disinfect caged pullet and layer facilities. So we did that work, and the problem with that I saw with it was that we didn't really weren't able to compare classes of disinfectant fairly. So what we wanted to do is to look at the major classes of agricultural disinfectants that are used by the industry, and to do some differential plating to see how they affect the microflora within that facility. So, as I mentioned before, we did some work with my former grad student, Miss Hinojosa, where we looked at broiler transport coops and had some success. So we wanted to try to look at layer cages. So we did a randomized block design, so we wouldn't have any building effect, and we skipped cages between each treatment as well, so we wouldn't get any overspray of the treatments. Um, the first trial we conducted at the Texas A&M Poultry Science Research Teaching and Extension Center, whereas the second trial we conducted at a commercial layer facility. And the cages were different, so we collected a larger surface area with the first trial, whereas the second, and we're trying to isolate DNA, so we collect a lot more surface area in the first trial than the second trial at the industry location. Again, we used a swab soaked in Peptone water. We stomached and serial diluted these samples and played them on the respective media. And our treatments were nothing at all: a low pressure water rinse, a high pressure water rinse, the cleaner we talked about before, and soap. So basically, these first three treatments are controls because we rinse the disinfectant off the cages with a low pressure water rinse before, and we also did high pressure water rinse before we disinfected. So we wanted to have the appropriate controls for this project. So we looked at an aldehyde product, which was glutaraldehyde, hydrogen peroxide, an oxidizer, parasitic acid again, phenolic product, and quaternary ammonium compound. For the second trial, the integrator wanted us to look at their product, which was a glutaraldehyde quaternary ammonia blend, and to meet their needs, we looked at that product as well. And it was pretty straightforward. We just purchased several garden sprayers and mixed up each batch of disinfectant the morning of the trial. So here are the results from the trial at the research farm. As we to kind of set this graph up, all of these will look like this. Over here on the y-axis are log 10 CFUs per millisample, and we have our treatments on the x-axis. Nothing, low pressure water rinse, high pressure water rinse, and then our different treatments. And so the high pressure water rinse and the low pressure water rinse, you'd want to compare to the control of nothing. And again, we observed no significant reductions with those two rinses. So we used the high pressure water rinse as our control for the disinfectant treatments and the cleaner treatments. And we did see some significant reductions with all of or most of the disinfectant treatments and for aerobic bacteria, which was encouraging. But it wasn't as large of a reduction as we saw earlier in the field, and we think that could be because there are some differences in the level of organic matter on these cages than what we saw in the earlier trial. We also looked at total coliforms, and we saw some reductions, but it's kind of hard to draw a lot of conclusions because we're kind of nearing our limit of detectability here for coliforms. We looked at staph and saw no reductions with staph. And again, these are pretty low levels, so it's kind of hard to parse out a difference at that low of a background. We looked for Pseudomonas, which is also a big concern for the industry, and we did observe some differences with the glutaraldehyde product and the quaternary ammonia products, so they work pretty well against Pseudomonas. In the second trial, we went to a commercial pullet farm, and the background levels of aerobic bacteria were similar to what we saw before. Um, the low pressure water rinse did work in this case, which was interesting, and we did see some greater reductions with all the disinfectant treatments as compared to the high pressure water rinse control. But the soap and cleaner wasn't useful. Saw a little bit higher levels of coliforms in this trial than the previous one, and we did observe some differences with all the disinfectant treatments, which is encouraging. Aldehyde, the glutaraldehyde product, was reduced to undetectable levels for coliforms. So that's a very powerful disinfectant, but there are also some health concerns as well. You'll make sure you're wearing a respirator and safety goggles, for example. So Staph aureus was a little bit higher in this one. The soap and cleaner again, and the rinses. Well, the rinses and soap and cleaner did reduce the bacterial load somewhat for staph, and all the disinfectants worked relatively well for reducing the staph aureus. And we also see reductions again for the disinfectants, with the exception of the hydrogen peroxide and the quad aldehyde blend. Didn't do a very good job in this instance. Again, soap and cleaner didn't help with Pseudomonas sampling. So in summary, the chlorinate cleaner, the soap, and the high and low pressure water rinses really didn't consistently reduce the bacterial load. Um, but all the disinfectants worked in some capacity as far as reducing bacteria, but you need to consider the characteristics of those products. Some mix well with soap, some don't. Some you can foam, some you can't foam. Some can be used in food producing facilities where others can't. Some are corrosive, and they might actually damage the equipment that you're working with. So that all these factors need to be considered when choosing a disinfectant. So to wrap the talk up, basically, biosecurity is a really simple concept. It involves some common sense and maybe even some level of healthy paranoia. So, you should always be thinking about, how can these pathogens enter my farm or my facility? And, somebody shows up that they look nice and clean and friendly, and you enjoy being around them. But for all you know, maybe they have a parrot at home or something, and maybe they're tracking, who knows what into your facility. So you should always be cognizant of that. We can't see these microbes, um, and anything has a potential for contamination and spreading diseases. Secondly, a compressed air foam system is an expedient and efficient means to apply disinfectants to agricultural surfaces. And all classes of disinfectants that we use, we believe, have their place, and they work well against the recommended pathogens and the application. But the surface has to be clean. In some ways, it's not a fair comparison for some of these disinfectants, because a lot of times we'll go to these farms and the surfaces are still dirty, and the problem is really hard to get some of these surfaces clean. So this is kind of a catch 22. Also, you need to strongly consider um, the characteristics of that disinfectant before you pick one to use at your facility. I'd like to acknowledge the USDA, APHIS, and Veterinary Services and Animal Care who provide funding for us over the years for these projects. They've been a great technical resource, and they've been very supportive of our research. So thank you very much for your time. I'd be happy to try to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Farnell. This was great. So let's open up the floor to questions. I've unmuted everybody's lines, although you might have muted yourself. So if you'd like to ask a question, please be sure to unmute. Well, while we're waiting for people to figure out their unmute buttons, I just wanted to say that it was a great talk.
Well, thank you.
The timing was perfect. And about halfway through, I did have a question, but you answered it in the second half. So
Okay.
therefore, I don't have any questions either.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I did a good job then. Well, I hope I didn't put anyone to sleep. Webinars are always hard to, you don't have that one-on-one interaction, but hopefully we shared the information with everybody that needed to have it. So.
Yeah, hi, this is Nathan Birnbaum. Am I coming through?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if you ever experimented with using a steel tipped brush for removing the organic material from footwear and then applying a fast acting disinfectant spray.
Oh, that's interesting that you say that. That's definitely something that I'm interested in is evaluating things like foot baths and these tire wash stations and whatnot. And that's something I'd like to work on, but I haven't done anything like that. And I'm not really aware of anybody that's published anything to that effect. But I think it needs to be looked at because these tire washes, these companies, to their credit, they spend quite a bit of money setting these up, but I wonder how effective they are, but I think you're exactly right on track. I think these boots need to be scrubbed thoroughly before they're disinfected, but I'm not sure how many people do that. Probably the safest bet's to have dedicated footwear at the farm that's just used for that farm and doesn't leave the farm.
Yeah, it was my concern with the powdered laundry bleach is that it only hits the bottom of the boot, doesn't get the sides or the top.
Yes, sir. That's always something I've wondered about as well because you wonder if it really gets down into the tread like it needs to, and I think it's just kind of a compromise as the liquid disinfectants you usually get contaminated so quickly with organic matter that at least these powder bleaches you can kind of scoop out the worst of it, but that same breath, you wonder how well they really work, and I don't know if it's been tested or not.
Yeah, there is one small scale study I could send you. Well, I'll send it to Lori and I'll have her forward it to you.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that. So,
Can we send it around to the entire group, Nate?
It was forwarded to VS a couple of months ago, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for the questions, Nate. Anybody else have questions for Dr. Farnell?
This is Arlene Buckholtz, and I was wondering, do you have a similar data with viruses testing those disinfectants?
Some years ago, we tried to we actually challenged broiler chicks with think it was bronchitis or Newcastle virus, and we were working with the virologist to try to look at how well the disinfectants worked on those surfaces, but we just had a lot of problems with it. We weren't able to find any of that virus from the vaccine strains, and my virologist I was working with got a job in industry, so that was kind of the end of that project. But yeah, I mean, it's of interest. I just haven't had the expertise or the help to make it happen at this point.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering, is one of those disinfectants you were using, is one of them Virkon, or is that one of the ones that you were using?
Yeah, I always try to avoid brand names because I don't want to sell anything. But yeah, I'm trying to remember how to pronounce it. Peroxy monosulfate, I believe. That's going to be the Virkon product. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the question, Arlene. Anybody else have questions?
So the first trial with the foam disinfection, we've submitted that paper to the Journal of Applied Poultry Research. So hopefully it'll be out pretty soon. And then the second trial, we hope to submit this afternoon. So hopefully these papers will both be out this fall.
Well, we'll keep our eyes out for that. And thank you very much for the work that you've been doing.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank y'all for your support.
And if there are no other questions, then we'll end this call and look forward to another call in 2 weeks. So look for the notice on that. Well, thank you again, Dr. Farnell, and everyone who joined. Have a great day.
Y'all too. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye.